Have you achieved success and a high income, but still lack personal fulfillment and work-life balance? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful But Struggling podcast. Join us as Erin, Eunicia, Joanne, and Mim share transformative insights and practical strategies just for you. Discover real stories and lessons that will elevate your personal satisfaction, professional accomplishment, and financial empowerment.
What do you think about the term imposter syndrome? Well, like it or not, today we're going to talk a little bit about that topic, define it a little bit, and maybe some of the different ways that it can look, especially in women in medicine, some of the mental health implications that can go along with it, and also what can we do about it. And today I am here with my good friend and host, Dr. Joanne Sotelo, and I would love to hear from your perspective, Joanne. How do you define imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome has been defined in so many ways, and I can tell you I even have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder with the term, because when I started hearing about it, it seemed like, oh my God, so many of us have struggled with that self-doubt, that low confidence when you feel like you don't belong in the room. But then I started hearing it so often that people were saying, oh, I cannot do that because I have imposter syndrome. So it started getting like a little bit of a negative connotation. But I started thinking about it and said, this is important, because I have been in several big rooms with a lot of women physicians and women physicians who are leaders, so well accomplished. And when the term imposter syndrome comes up, I am so surprised that most of the room raises their hand. At least one time in their career, they felt imposter syndrome. And I was thinking it's worth paying attention to it, whether we like the term. And it's not like a syndrome, like in medical terms. We understand that. That's, just, how someone decided to frame it. You can rename it if you want to, but it's still something, a cluster of things that we decided that we sometimes identify with. And women in medicine, we think of them as smart, independent, hardworking, caring. And yet, even with all the accomplishments, there is a lack of confidence sometimes. So I think that's kind of what's underneath a lot of whatever we're identifying as imposter syndrome. But that's, kind of like that in simple terms, you're faking it. Or if you read about it, a lot of times they say the word fraud, like it's not real. And I always say, if you're concerned that you're faking it, I bet you're not. So that's kind of my first tangent here. It's the other thing that comes to mind is when I hear people saying like, I am afraid that I am a bad mom. I bet you hear that a lot as a pediatrician, Erin. And I'm like, just because you're bringing it up, I can tell that you're not. So that's kind of another frame that I hear when women are like, I feel like an imposter. And I think the caveat here is just thinking about it. If you feel like that, ask yourself why. Are there some facts? I know the bigger place where I feel like an imposter is in a place that I think there are facts for me to feel like that. I don't feel like a fraud. I don't feel like I'm faking it. I don't think that I don't belong. But I sat with the term and then said, what's making me feel this way? And I said, well, the people around me are way better prepared at this position. And then I had to tap into, well, why am I in this position? And someone believed in me enough to assign me to it. And I'm in the process of learning. And when I need to show up as the leader, I do it well. So I know there's some things that might not be factual, and it could be more of my self-doubt. So that's kind of a very long definition that I just gave you, Erin.
Well, and I heard you mention some things like self-doubt, questioning, even perfectionism, hardworking, comparison. How am I in this position compared to others? And I remember myself being promoted into a leadership position, and I was in leadership positions for the majority of my career. And yet I was used to someone else being in the medical director position. And when it was offered to me, still remember, I look back at this, I was very kind of meek and like, hi, I'm Dr. Erin Hurley. I'm the new medical director. And I think back to that and I thought, who was I serving showing up in that way? Kind of meek like a mouse, not courageous like a lion. And I look back at that and thought, I really was struggling with some imposter syndrome at that time. And yet, when I think about my career leading up to that point, and you had said, I had so many years in leadership. I had so many skills that I brought to that position. It was new to me, but I was not new to leadership. And sometimes we can shift our perspective so that we can see it from a different lens. And as you said, oh, someone believed in me enough to put me in this position. And can we believe in ourselves as much as others do? And with that, I'm wondering with you, we talked a little bit about defining this. And what do you feel like the specific implications for imposter syndrome or how it can look? What are they like specifically for women in medicine and women physicians?
And it's important to look at it in terms of why, as women physicians, we are somewhat more susceptible to feeling this way. And it doesn't make sense to some other people to say, why you're so accomplished, you've done so many things. And we have to also look at it in terms of the culture. And even though the numbers are evening out, there's still a cultural expectation that medicine has been traditionally male dominated, and that as women, we feel like we have to give that extra, especially in leadership. When you look at numbers, at total numbers, it's somewhat 50-50 men and women. But when you look at leadership positions, there's a drastic difference. So we are already feeling we don't belong just by how it looks, even though intellectually, of course, we know that we do. So that's one thing. And we have this need to prove ourselves. And I always talk about feminine and masculine energy and how often as women physicians, we have to tap into a lot of that masculine energy just to be in the room, and that we believe that we have to do extra. And the key word here is belief. These are not necessarily facts or the way it should be. It's kind of part of the culture. Hopefully it's changing, but I felt that I've been in leadership rooms and, where I've been called, oh, you're so cute. And I'm like, what? That in this place, it's not a compliment. And so anyways, I can go on a full tangent there, but a lot of us feel like that sometimes. There's also, go ahead.
Well, this makes me think about oftentimes gender differences. And oftentimes as a woman, we assume we're going to be treated fairly. We assume that we will be given our worth. And yet we know that there are big differences, not only in who are sitting in the leadership positions, but also in income differences between men and women physicians. And sometimes that's just a matter of learning to advocate for yourself, whether it's advocating for yourself to step into a leadership position or even advocating for yourself for pay that is equal to that of the males in your same office or same field. And oftentimes as women, just advocating for ourselves feels uncomfortable. And oftentimes men don't feel that same discomfort. And they're like, well, if I advocate for myself, they're either going to say yes or no. And women, maybe we take it a little more personally. And I wonder, the differences in women and imposter syndrome. Any other differences that you recognize between men and women and imposter syndrome, Joanne?
And from what I remember in reading about it, it is more common in women because we tend to have more of that self-doubt. And there's plenty of studies showing how men jump into roles way less ready, and they know it, but they just go for it. Like, I'll learn in the job. And women, we have to be almost 80-90% ready for it. And we could probably have a podcast just on gender differences and be ready with all those statistics. But it is this lack of confidence, the self-doubt, feeling like we don't belong, definitely more common in women. And this other point is also more common in women, which is how the perfectionism in the culture of medicine, which we've talked about it in this podcast, in how that gets in our way. Because if you have that expectation of yourself that you have to be perfect, of course you're going to feel that you're lacking, that it's not good enough. So it will definitely feed that imposter syndrome or cluster of symptoms. There's also the role strain that's the differences, because we have this double shift that we call of having to be present at work and then coming home and taking care of the family, and like we don't feel like we have enough time. So we end up feeling that we're not showing up well enough anywhere. I remember when my first kid, he was like 3 or 4, and we had moved. And I talking about it like I had like a big leadership position. I was starting a clinic, and the first one in my department, and now there's like 40 of us. But then my kid was starting school, and I wanted to be that mom and all the things. And I was like, I don't belong in this school mom thing, and I don't belong. And then I'm not showing up the way I was used to before at work, because I we've talked about it and kind of leaning towards working more than we should. And I remember at that point saying, I need to accept that I'm not going to be 100% on either one, and that me showing up 50%, I'm my best at that 50% or whatever percent it is in the moment, that's good enough. And because if not, I'm gonna feel like I'm lacking. And and it wasn't that I had that revelation and then it was perfect. I struggled with it for a long time. But I remember having that thought of, this is too much of an expectation. But that's something that definitely happens more to us women in medicine. And then what we've talked as well, that we don't have enough representation literally in the leadership tables, and we don't have it in terms of our role models of who we look up to. We just don't have enough of us there. So all of that can contribute, and we can, if imposter syndrome doesn't feel like something that you identify with, also tap into where you feel like you're not good enough, or you self-doubt, or that low confidence, because it shows up. It breaks my heart how often I hear this from the women in medicine I coach. But we all feel it. That's the truth.
Well, and one of the things we talked about earlier is sometimes it's recognizing, am I overcompensating? Am I working harder than everyone else, whether it's at parenting or at my job or at my leadership role, to prove myself? And at the root cause of that is that self-doubt or imposter syndrome. And again, sometimes the words others use may not resonate, but when you look beyond that, again, overcompensating, hardworking, perfectionistic, sometimes that might help you better recognize if you are experiencing some of this. And I'm wondering, Joanne, what are the things that we can do about imposter syndrome? We've talked about some of the definitions of it and what it might look like and how it might impact us. And now I'd love to know, what can I do about it?
Yes, always. The first thing, and this comes from my heart as a psychiatrist and also as a coach, we have to acknowledge your feelings. We are really good at being like, oh, but I'm okay. Like, I'll figure it out. And sometimes we have to sit with the emotions, and that there's multiple reasons for that. First of all, we have been talking about mental health and the mental health implications in physicians, that the numbers are higher than the general population. And when we're in that low confidence, self-doubt, constantly beating ourselves up, when most of your sentences start with I should or I'm not good enough, it can lead to feeling more anxiety, more stress, even depression. Of course, this could also lead to burnout, foster more isolation as well. So there's that part of the acknowledgement. It's also to avoid those other consequences. And the other side of the coin is also acknowledging, what is this emotion of the imposter syndrome? I'm going to call it that. I've called it like 10 different things in this podcast. Is it giving me information? It's, our brain compares, and comparison is almost a survival instinct, right? If we go back to the cave ages, and you see these other people, they look, healthier, heavier, they seem like they have better coatings. You want to know, what are they doing that I'm not doing if I'm here skinny and cold? So it's something that our brain does. The problem is that our brain usually compares to our detriment to show us what we're lacking. But if we pause and we ask ourselves, is there something here for me to learn? Am I comparing just because? Or is there something I can learn? Is there something that I'm seeing in someone else that I could work towards? So that's the other side of the acknowledgement of all those emotions. And then from there, a second thing, again, in giving the coaching tips, we reframe the thoughts.
Right.
And it's good to, this is kind of my chip on the shoulder, to do not use it as an excuse. Do not be like, oh, it must be imposter syndrome. And I'm sorry that if I'm sounding sarcastic here, but we're also here to challenge and to give you things that could be helpful. Rather say, is this my self-doubt and I need to think about it? Or is there something I want to do and learn? And then reframe it to, how good that I have this awareness. I am going to work towards it. I'm learning, and that's okay. Things can get better. It sounds simple, but these reframes can be so, so, so powerful. And then, of course, if you are stuck there, always seek for help. We're almost always going to talk about that in here. And remember, help does not need to be see a psychiatrist or see a coach. It could be check in with your colleagues. How often do we talk about it here? Erin and I talk about it all the time, and it's so nice to have the ability to be vulnerable and talk about our emotions, because first of all, we can help each other, and then you also know that you're not alone.
Love that, Joanne. So today we've been talking about imposter syndrome, and some other terms that might resonate would be perfectionism, hardworking, comparison, self-doubt. We've talked about that imposter syndrome is more common in women than it is in men, and that it can affect us in other ways by increasing things like anxiety and even burnout. And what can we do about it? I love that aspect you bring to light, Joanne, so well, is awareness. What's going on? And then getting curious and putting it into a reframe and asking, what should I be learning from this feeling of self-doubt or imposter syndrome in order to reframe it and see what can I learn or how can I pivot in a different direction from that? And any other words of wisdom about imposter syndrome that you would like to share with our listener, Joanne?
I always like to think of a beautiful thing I can offer with a little bow that sounds very pretty. But today I'm going to leave you with a challenge. Challenge yourself. Where are you feeling that sense of imposter syndrome, self-doubt, or low confidence? And think of what is one thing you can do or a thought that you can reframe a little bit so that you lift yourself up, because you will take better actions if you feel better about yourselves. And that's going to help you with your overall well-being and mental health, which is part of what we're here to help you with.
Love that so much, Joanne. And with that, we hope you will stay tuned for our next episode. And also, if you haven't yet given us a rating or a review, we would love to hear your thoughts about how this podcast is affecting you, and also get your rating. We'll see you in the next show.
Have you achieved success and a high income, but still lack personal fulfillment and work-life balance? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful But Struggling podcast. Join us as Erin, Eunicia, Joanne, and Mim share transformative insights and practical strategies just for you. Discover real stories and lessons that will elevate your personal satisfaction, professional accomplishment, and financial empowerment.